Hi, this is Josh Kulp. We are learning Avodah Zarah for Daf Shevui. We are on Daf Ayin Bet, page 72. The Daf this week is divided really into two completely separate sections. The first section is sort of a tag on the earlier sugyot and has to do with contracts and with sales and when one is allowed to renege on a sale. The second half gets back to the topic of the fourth and fifth chapters, and that is Yayin Nesech. And I want to concentrate in this video on the second half. The Mishnah that begins the second half of this daf says that if a Jew picks up a funnel and uses it to pour into the flask of a non-Jew. In other words, he takes kosher wine and pours it into a flask of a non-Jew, and then he pours into a flask of a Jew. If there's still wine, sort of stuck, residue of wine on the funnel, it's called a mashpech in Hebrew, then when he puts it into the Jewish wine, he creates a prohibition, because there's Jewish, non-Jewish wine, yayin nesech, now mixed up into the Jewish wine. But if one pours from one vessel to another, the vessel he's pouring from is permitted and the vessel he's pouring into is forbidden. So if a Jew is pouring into a non-Jewish vessel, the stuff in the non-Jewish vessel is prohibited and the stuff in the Jewish vessel is permitted. And this brings the Gemara into a long discussion of a concept we've talked about before, and that's called nitzok, or the flow from an upper container into a lower container, or upper vessel into a lower vessel. Does the flow become prohibited? Does the impurity or the yayin nesech attribute of the lower wine go up into the upper container? And our sugi spends a lot of energy trying to decide and going through different opinions about whether it does or it doesn't. Now, at the very sort of towards the end of the sugya, I want to note something that creates a fundamental problem in understanding the entirety of the laws of yayin nesech. There is a Braita that gets quoted, a Tanaitic source that gets quoted, that if someone is pouring from a jug into a vat of non-kosher wine, the spout that goes down into, once it comes out of the jug, is prohibited. And that would seem to hold that nitzok, right, creates a prohibition. The prohibition is below, it flows up and prohibits the spout. Now, Rav Sheshet, to avoid the concept of nitzok, says that's when a non-Jew is pouring. And here's where our very foundational problem in all of the laws of yayin nesech come, and there are a lot of cases where the Rishonim have great difficulty in understanding what these are about. The question is, what creates the yayin nesech? Is it that the non-Jew touched it? Or is it that the non-Jew may have poured out some as a libation? If we read a lot of these sugyot seem to work on the sense of touch. That any time a non-Jew touches the wine, that creates a prohibition, something that might be akin to the laws of purity and impurity. That impurity is imparted through contact. And if you go back and you do some review, you'll see that there are a lot of sugyot, a lot of passages that seem to think that is the main root of what causes wine to become yayin nesech. Indeed, that's what Rashi says causes yayin to become yayin nesech. But there are other Rishonim who say, no, look, let's think about it. What did it mean to libate? We've seen several times, libating meant pouring out a little bit onto the ground for the gods. That's pouring. A non-Jew who pours something, even without touching, could, if we rule strictly, be creating a prohibition of yayin nesech. And now we have to go back through all of the sugyot, and there are sugyot, passages in the Talmud that seem to think that pouring is what creates yayin nesech, and there are passages in the Talmud that seem to think that touching is what creates yayin nesech. Probably the explanation is here that in the laws of yayin nesech you have really two originally succinct ideas. One, thinking of the non-Jew as a source of tumah, of impurity. That's at least expressed not through the laws of impurity, but it's expressed in an impure kind, with rules that come from the laws of impurity, namely touch. But there's also the Avodah Zarah antecedents of Yayin Nesach, that it comes from the world of Avodah Zarah. And then we have to look, what did non-Jews do to cause something to be idolatrous or be used in idolatrous ceremony? And that was pouring. That creates a tremendous amount of confusion. There are very long passages in the Tosfot and other Rishonim trying to bring some cohesiveness to all of these sugyot. I think in the end, many of them really have a lot of trouble because there is an irreparable divide between these two concepts of Yayin Nesach. So keep your eye out for them as we go through some of the rest of this daf, and you can see which perush works better. I think at points in this sugya, the perush of pouring seems to work better than the perush of touching.